Yeah, that'll be seen in what I'm presenting here. So let's go through this, okay? Thank you. Um, Regarding the introduction, the theses are these. Thesis number 1, the small congregation has been the dominant institutional expression of Protestant Christianity in North America. The idea of a megachurch is, I think, a 20th century thing, a late 20th century thing. Most congregations are not that large, whatever that means. I mean, I think it used to be the rule in the United Methodist Church that once a congregation reaches 300 members, that congregation needs to plant a new church, which is why if you go into some small cities and towns in America, you'll see First Methodist Church right downtown. And then there's a Second Methodist Church that's called Second Methodist Church on the outer banks of the city or in the township or something. 300 might have been considered a small congregation, but in our situation, we are far below that at this point in time. Yeah.
I don't know if it's generally true among the Methodists like it is among the Baptists, but second churches were not second because they were planted by the first ones. They were second churches because they were black.
Because of what?
They were
Yeah.
black.
Yeah.
So if you go into Medina, the Second Baptist is the black church. First Baptist is the white.
Yeah, at Ashland Seminary, at that excellence program that we were in. In my group with Walter, 330 pounds, and he was the pastor of Second St. Peter Missionary Baptist Church in Detroit, and that was the black church. And so, yeah,
I
I
don't
think you're
know
right.
if it's generally true among the Methodists to the same way.
It may have changed, but that's the way my reading said that. Okay. Thesis number 2 is, today the societal context for the small congregation has changed from supportive to neutral to, in many places, a hostile environment. Now, that's what I wrote found out in 1995, but if you read the Lutheran Witness, if you read that, what is it? More than 50% of the congregations in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod average less than 100 in worship. And I think 40% even more, less than 50. So that's what's happening. Now, I don't know if it's a hostile environment. I don't think so. But there's maybe a push for congregations to dissolve, but not in our context. But we have a different polity. Thesis 3, the small church has a bright and promising future if it is willing to adapt to a new role in a changing future. Okay, so those are the theses here. Any comments before we move on? Okay, the assumptions behind these theses are the following. The small church is not a miniature version of the large congregation. Maybe it doesn't need to be said, but it's obvious that we small congregations are not like the large congregations. There's a difference between those kinds of congregations. Number 2, the small church naturally tends to be the dominant institutional expression of Protestant Christianity in North America. As I was traveling through the rural section of Stark County and then coming into Summit and Wayne, and I look at the churches, just look at the buildings, you would say those are small churches, and that's in the Protestant context. So again, that is reinforcing thesis 1. Number 3, what I had given to the pastors that day was by the year 2020, that was the date, congregations averaging fewer than 100 at worship will represent at least 40% of all U.S. and Canadian Protestant churches. And that's, I think that prophecy was fulfilled. In fact, it's probably higher than 40% these days. Probably more than 50% are averaging less than 100. Number 4, a growing proportion of small congregations will depend on bivocational pastors and ministerial teams. The only bivocational pastor we have is Kevin.
And I don't fit that mold.
And you're not.
The way it's originally designed.
Yeah, a person working in the secular field.
I have a retirement check. If I didn't
Yeah.
have a retirement check, I would have to have it.
When we were looking at calling a pastor, when Resurrection was being started, and I was the founding pastor for that congregation, and we said the congregation could not afford a full-time pastor. So we got the call document ready to send to the council of presidents, whatever, and we asked for a bivocational, a worker priest, as it were. And it turned out that there were no candidates at either seminary who had indicated that they would be open to a worker priest call, except Kevin.
Yeah, essentially that, I don't even think that question exists on that document or the document, thing we fill out before we get our calls. They called me in, they said, would you, obviously they knew my background.
You were the only one. And praise the Lord, we got Kevin into our district and so forth. Number 5, merger with another small congregation should not have a high priority, and neither should disbanding or closing or dissolving. We have one dual parish in our circuit, Grace and Holy Trinity, right? And so, our brother John is a dual parish pastor. Others, that are, low in membership are just continuing to exist the way they are. And so what I have here is not a recommendation nor a hope about bivocational pastors or dual parishes. But you can see there were a number of dual parishes in the synod, and I see, if you read the Lutheran Witness and the Reporter, you'll see from different districts, primarily out west, in the central states, where such and such a church and such a church have, come to an agreement to call one pastor to serve both congregations. So, is that going to be happening more and more? I don't know. Number 6. Okay. Merger with another small congregation should not have a high priority, and neither should disbanding or closing or dissolving. The assumption here is that congregation can continue to exist the way they are without going that route. But number 6, numerical growth should never be the top priority for the small church that has been in existence for a decade or longer. Rather, the number 1 priority should be planned change from within the organization. And again, the Lutheran logic, change, but anyway. Small congregations probably in their head and maybe in their discussions talk about, we need to grow. We need to grow, we're down in membership. But the idea here is that numerical growth should not be the issue. And we'll talk about that later on here. That, word and sacrament are being provided, okay, and that doesn't mean that we don't proclaim in the community. But we have to change, and I can see that in my congregation. When I got there, still some ethnic stuff there, a small group of, families, and they thought of themselves as a small church. And as we were growing, transfer, conversions happening, people coming in with the preschool and all that kind of stuff. Those people they felt very afraid of what was going on here. This is not the little church we had before. We're growing. Oh no. And then we grew. We did grow. And with some conflicts in there because these new people are changing things. And now, as I minister to our people in Massillon, they're thinking, we've got to grow. We've got to grow. We got to do what we were doing in the 90s well. Or they think of it that we're now a large church and we have to do what we used to do in the 90s, and that's not happening. So they have to change their attitude about what is important. And what we'll see, and I don't want to get into it yet,